but I've definitely looked back to having trouble falling asleep at night because I think a plane is going to crash down if I don't do something the right way. Or there's been periods of time based on where I lived where I would get up and check the back door a lot because I was scared that somebody was going to break into the house. I can remember doing those things and nobody knowing about it, and think about myself and like have that compassionate view, of like, you didn't know what was going on.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Please Excuse My OCD. My name is Tyler, and I'm here with my friend Erin Jones, who is a therapist at Bull City Anxiety and OCD Treatment Center, based out of Durham, North Carolina, where she specializes in OCD and related disorders. She works with kids, teens, and adults, and is a member of the International OCD Foundation. And through her journey to become an OCD specialist, Erin learned more about her own lived experience with OCD and anxiety, which she now uses to help others live, as she puts it, an ERP lifestyle. So I am so excited for Erin to be here and really look forward to hearing more about her story and her advocacy and work within the OCD community. So thanks so much for being here, Erin.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. And it was wonderful meeting you at the conference, and your mom. She was so sweet.
Likewise. My
Yeah.
mom, she's like, it was an exposure for me just to be there. And my mom knew that, and she was a great support, and she learned so much, and as did I. And so it was so cool. Like after you were like, I know you. And my mom, like afterwards, she was like, "Oh, that was so cool! Like it's so cool to see the community here." So, your story of lived experience now transitioning, into a place where you are helping others with theirs, I think is the coolest thing that you can do in this world, is give back and help others with things that you've been through. So I would love to just, hear a little bit about your story and where you came from in regards to OCD and like really how you found your way to helping others.
Yeah, I depends how how much time do we have. I think I'll start with we might have to redirect some. I'll start with
Sure.
journey to becoming a therapist because that actually happened first.
Hmm.
I think for a lot of folks in practicing OCD therapy, it tends to go the other way, right? Like you've
Sure.
had successful therapy yourself, like, okay, I want to help other people with this. Was always interested in mental health, becoming a therapist in general. Did some therapy when I was younger, but it was never OCD focused, which I'll come back to. Um, I went to NC State, which is in Raleigh, North Carolina. Worked for a while. I studied psychology there. I worked out of the field though. And a few years later, I went back to grad school out of Asheville, North Carolina, if anybody knows where that is. And that I got my master's in mental health counseling there. And even while I was in that program, there's really not, it's him about being a counselor in general. There's really not that much about OCD specifically in like more general programs. While I was completing my master's and interned at a community agency, I eventually got a job at a practice that practices cognitive behavioral therapy, which is like a big umbrella for a lot of things, ERP being one of them. We're going to say a lot of acronyms today, but cognitive behavioral therapy is that one. And uh, basically, I had some really, really great like mentors. You have to work with a supervisor for a couple of years when you're new to getting your license. And the message I kept getting was like, hey, we really have a need for, people to work with OCD and things related to it. I think you'd be really good at that. I don't know if like they knew before I did, or if maybe it just found me. But the more that
Hmm.
I got into that niche and did the trainings and just worked with people in this wonderful community, I started to see a lot of things in my own life in a different way. So I in summary, I didn't know that I had OCD or symptoms of it throughout my life until I was already a therapist, because it never showed up in I don't know, more of the ways that OCD is commonly known for, like
Sure.
contamination or things like that. So we'll certainly come back to like what
Yeah.
I realized was coming up in my life, and I still work with it. But having that realization and also accepting that that was what it was has helped me work on it in my own life, and I think become a better therapist and community member too. So I didn't know till after I was already practicing.
I think that's it. To be honest with you, it's no surprise, I think, to hear that, because the more you and because OCD is so misunderstood, even in the mental health field as well. Um, it seems that because you were learning about that sector, of mental health, and you were actually around people who lived with it, maybe that was kind of the kickback that was reflective for you, where you're like, hang on a second, I feel like maybe I've dealt with this on some level.
Yes. At first, I think it was like, wow, I get this really well. Maybe it wasn't like that quick of a jump in confidence, but
Sure.
just
Yeah.
over time, like, wait, I get this a little too well. And
Hmm.
um, more specifically, just learning like, I think throughout my life, I've OCD isn't the only thing that's been there. I've struggled with anxiety in different ways for many years. So I could say it was probably also masked by more of like social anxiety, general anxiety, definitely public speaking type
Hmm.
phobias. But again, looking back, I can see multiple different like adjustments and times in my life where I'm like, yeah, I've had OCD.
Makes sense. It's I am interested in that side of your story, because I feel like a lot of the people that I've had, on the show, and even with my own experience of living with it, it's very loud at certain points, throughout my life personally, and the people who have been in the show, they talk about their experience with it being very loud at one point, where it's just like undeniable. They don't understand it. It's like, how do I navigate this? And then at that point, it's so heavy where they become afraid to go and get help or go and talk to a doctor, because they feel, well, if I say these things that are on my mind, what's going to happen? For like your experience, as a therapist who's around people who present with these types of symptoms, do you find that it's still very much that consensus where somebody comes in and they're terrified to tell you these things, and they're terrified to like get that off their chest about what they're struggling with? Or do you see it like changing in any way where people are more open about, hey, I struggle with this, and what is this, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean it really depends so much. I can say to people who are feeling that and maybe are feeling really afraid to even look up an OCD therapist and even think about talking about it. We know how it is, whether the OCD therapists actually have OCD or not. Um, you get started by getting into the process, giving some information, getting to know the person, and you don't have to say everything. You'll get to what you want to get to when you're ready.
Mhm.
But we know how it shows up, and we won't judge you. So I just want people to know that. But
I love
um
that.
I would say it just, I don't know, it depends on the person. I would say even in the
Hmm.
past, like, I don't know, 5 years or so, there's been so many more things in research and social media, like, even people like you doing this podcast. And I don't know the studies on it, but just more in what I'm observing. I do meet a lot of people who are already they see our practice and they see that we're OCD specialists. So maybe that's why I could see a little more people who are ready to talk about it, because
Hmm.
they know that they're going to a place for that. I think if maybe
Sure.
I was in a different type of setting,
Hmm.
um people might be a little more hesitant. I think we still
Hmm.
need to get to younger folks sooner. Um,
Yes.
so it's hard to answer that just because I don't know if there's still a lot of people out there who are stuck and
Hmm. That
scared to
makes
talk about
sense.
it because they're not talking about it.
It it's just some, and just from the conversations I've been having with people um who are kind of in, my age group, and I just turned 30 this year, and I see a lot of similar, situations where growing up nobody talked about it, and it was very very much like, I don't know who thinks like this, who's going to like trust me if I tell them these thoughts. So I always find it interesting to see if there's any movement society wise where people are becoming more open to talking about it, and hopefully getting
Mhm.
that help. For somebody who's listening to this and they have no idea about anything in regards to therapy and therapists, they may see somebody who's like licensed as a therapist and think like that's enough to uh,
Right.
attack their OCD. So, like, what would you say to them as an OCD specialist? Like, what is the main difference in terms of treating OCD as an OCD specialist versus a therapist who's, just taking on clients generally?
Yeah. So there are differences, I would say, to somebody who's, like you said, maybe in that position of looking for an OCD specialist or seeing a more general therapist. We need more of it, but
Hmm.
OCD is just very, I mean, the evidence just shows that it's treated much better or maintained much better, right? By evidence-based practices like ERP, ICBT, exposure therapy being
Hmm.
ERP, and the talk therapy can feel supportive and nice. And I don't think other therapists always, or the people being in it, I've been in it myself before where it was a lot of talking. And so they might just not know,
Hmm.
but it can actually make it worse, being
Hmm.
in more talk therapy again, although it can feel supportive, could actually just lead you to be ruminating, overthinking, and actually compulsing, potentially making things worse. So it's
Hmm.
very, very important to be working with somebody who at least has some training or is a specialist in evidence-based practices for OCD. As for finding that, I'd recommend going through iocdf.org. They have a directory
Hmm.
of specialists. They also have directories of support groups, many of them being free if you're on a wait list or you just kind of want to get into a group and see how that is first. Um,
Yeah, they're incredible. And I know you're doing work within the IOCDF. And this, coming back to a little bit with your story too, you said that you started to see connect the dots from the people you were working with based on things that had happened, or mechanisms that your brain kind of ran through in past years. What was that process for you like when you realized like, oh, I actually have this? And how, as a therapist who helps people with OCD and also has it themselves, what is that realization like, and how do you move with that?
yeah, there's so much I could say to that. I
Yeah.
would say the realization was it took time. It wasn't like one aha moment. In fact, I'm sure many folks listening can relate, but even being a therapist, I debated for a while whether or not I had OCD, which that's kind of an
Mm,
OCD thing, right? Maybe or people have it
yes.
worse, but eventually speak, you know what? Yeah, that's OCD, have it. But I would say at first, maybe kind of sad, like for my younger self, to be like, because it was really loud at times, but I was just kind of, I don't know, getting by.
Yeah.
I don't like the term high functioning, but like I don't know if anyone would have known unless I knew that it was that and said something.
Hmm.
So I wish I could tell my younger self, or that I would have known, like, hey, there could be some medication that could help you, or you should probably tell somebody that like you're not sleeping well. And it would come in big waves and come and go depending on the circumstance. But yeah, lots of ways I could answer that question. But I would say maybe sad at first, but also comforting and full
Hmm.
circle moment to understand. things in my life and help me move forward as a therapist, but as a person. Like I know what to
Sure.
do now. And I've had times
Yeah.
where it's still pretty loud and um, so that doesn't go away, but I know how to work with it now because I know what it is.
I think that's a beautiful thing to acknowledge, when you said that it still sometimes is loud. And that's, I think people may feel, many different ways about that, but we talk about OCD being a lifelong thing, a chronic disorder, something that you need to learn to move with along time versus push away or stomp on it or whatever. And I think the fact of the matter where you said that you learn to deal with it, now in different healthy ways, as opposed to being a younger version of yourself, scared to tell people, or just like you said, high functioning. And because I can totally relate to that. Like I still
Mhm.
showed up to school every day with debilitating intrusive thoughts and compulsions that took me forever to get out of the house. So I can totally relate to that, and being high functioning and not saying anything to anybody because you're just like, well, it's not like I'm like bedridden, or it's not like I'm, you don't really know any other
Mhm.
way, and to some degree.
Yeah. I really, of course, like, there's high degrees of differences in people with OCD, so many ways, but um, I want to let people know, especially if you could be struggling with this and maybe you're not like having the most severe case of OCD in the world, it's still valid,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Don't gaslight yourself.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Don't
Your brain
gaslight
already tries
yourself.
to do that enough with OCD anyway, so um
Yeah.
yeah.
It's so true. And now, you had mentioned that have a lot of experience lately working with adults and specifically moms with OCD, in the realm of postpartum as well. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because that's an area that I don't really know much about in terms of like, mothers with OCD and what that's like, and maybe why that is something that you're seeing more of, and like, your passion within that sector of OCD. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes, another question I could say so much about, so we'll
Yeah.
go for it. I'm a mom. I have two girls. They're 4 and 2, and they're amazing. And it's like suspiciously quiet here right now. They might be away. No kids busting in, but I think as we know, OCD can come up in many different ways. We don't know what causes it,
Mhm.
whether it's a combination of genetics or specific life factors. Like there's so many different times in life and ways it can come up. One of those times is during the hormonal changes that take place when somebody is either pregnant or has recently had a
Mhm.
child. Perinatal OCD, it's sometimes called postpartum OCD. It's kind of
Mhm.
all in the same bubble. Uh, just for anyone who doesn't know. I think they say about like 1 in 3 birthing parents, moms, uh, I know you're like, no, it's more than that. Whatever
No, I
the
think that's
number
that's
is,
wild.
it's way more than that. Because
Wow.
it's like every couple of moms out of 100 or something like that. I'm questioning my fact checking. Whatever it is online, I feel so confident that it's way more than that.
Mhm.
And again, I'm talking about pregnant slash postpartum moms who are either having really, really difficult intrusive thoughts and compulsions, possibly for the first time, or
Mhm.
maybe they've already had some OCD before, but it worsens or it's sparked. I mean, imagine having a child, a new baby. You leave the hospital, you hear about all the ways that, it could be harmed. And it's like, here you go home
Sure.
and take care of this thing. Plus the fatigue, hormonal changes, and then having a scary thought. And again, I'm talking about OCD. It's, it could be a random intrusive thought, not always about the baby, but often during that time it is.
Sure.
Would you want to tell a doctor about it? Especially if you don't know that they already know what OCD is? So I'm
Mhm.
thinking back to what you said earlier about like do I hear about a lot of people where it's loud and they don't want to tell somebody? New parents are a really big population that it makes me think of when you say that, because I know
Wow.
so many moms, way more than whatever the statistic probably is, that
Wow.
have those scary thoughts. And I think there's a lot of people out there, including multiple organizations, that are trying to uh, make that more well known, and especially have medical providers screen for this, because they're
Wow,
not,
that would be.
so that we can catch it.
When you talk about screening too, my brain automatically goes to like a brain scan, because you can see OCD, with certain scans in the brain versus, just like a normal brain without, you know, the activity that OCD is throwing around up there. Or
Yeah,
are you talking more of like a sheet where they fill it out and
I'm talking about, thank you for clarifying that. I'm talking about when women and their partners,
Mhm.
it happens to adoptive parents, dads, anyone with any gender identity, probably a little more common that it's moms. I'm talking about when they are at their doctor's appointments,
Mhm.
specifically after the baby's born too, or while they're pregnant. Providers are usually doing brief screenings for postpartum depression, maybe
Mhm.
sometimes more of a general anxiety, but there are typically not screenings happening for OCD. I mean, screenings like asking prompted questions and giving assessments at doctor's appointments.
Gotcha. That's Thank you for clarifying that. I mean, that
Mhm.
itself, it was just so surprising to me, to hear like that. It seems to be something very prevalent, amongst mothers who just had a newborn. And I'm even thinking, because I'm thinking in the OCD brain, not as a mother. I can't tell you obviously that I understand that, but as somebody with the OCD brain, like how OCD attacks the things that we love and the things that
Yeah.
we truly do have a care for. And it's no surprise to me that a thought, it could be anything that kind of enters the mother's brain, for the first time. Maybe they've never thought about, you know, um, the idea of driving in a car with your newborn, on your first
Yeah.
day driving home, like something like that. I can totally see how that might be enough to set that chain off, and how that can be extremely terrifying for a newborn mother. And never mind just, having a baby or not, like it could be extremely terrifying for anybody, to have an intrusive thought and not know what to do with it, or like what that's about. You, as somebody who's helping mothers and somebody who's very passionate about this side of the OCD community, like how would we be able to screen better for, for mothers, or expectant mothers, for example? Like how would we be able to catch OCD, or even like a way to foreshadow it in a way, before they have a child? Like, is that something
Mhm.
we'd be able to do?
Yeah, for sure. I think we're working on it.
Yeah.
For example, in IOCDF, we have the Moms with OCD SIG special interest group, which I'm a part of. Shout out to Krista and Alex and Tracy. They're amazing. Um, Groups like that, Postpartum Support International. So to answer your question first, I think just spreading awareness to moms, women, their family members, partners, because again, it happens to partners too. And like
Hmm.
they need to see it in the birthing parents. And so people just knowing, because by the time I had my children, especially my second one, I was having some of this pop up. It definitely could have been more severe than it was, but I was able, again, to already know what it was, um, have a lot of support around it. So I just feel so much for people who have no idea. And then again, they're scared to tell somebody because they don't know if, they might think, oh, well, what if they think that I shouldn't be around my baby or something. So
Mm.
I think those of us in groups like that are also working on helping wanting to move forward with helping educate medical providers, meaning OBGYNs,
Mhm.
doctors, even pediatricians, because, when you have a newborn baby, you're taking them to more frequent doctor's appointments, they're usually doing like a quick depression screening on the new parent. Usually
Hmm.
only the mom, they miss the other partners too.
Wow.
And usually I'm being very general. Like if
Sure.
people are out there doing it, like great, please comment and let me know. But a lot of people are not.
Yeah.
Um, so I think again, a combination of greater awareness just for women slash parents to know, hey, like look out for these things. Check in with your therapist. Like you're certainly still fitting to pursue like having a child and being pregnant, but that awareness and having that support system so you
Hmm.
know where to go if it starts to come up, and for the medical providers to know so that they can screen for it or, ask those questions.
Yeah, thank you for that, by the way. And I would like to share that link as well in the show notes about, moms of OCD. I think that would be an
Mhm.
incredible asset for a lot of people out there listening who may not even know that exists. I, for one, didn't know that existed. So,
Mhm.
um, I think that there's people I know in my mind right now who would benefit from that. So,
We would
I'll
love
be
to meet
sharing that.
them.
I love
uh,
that. I love that.
I also want to reiterate that when you talk about perinatal OCD, it's usually only focused on, the time in pregnancy and postpartum, let's say up to a year
Hmm.
of the child being born. But as we know, OCD can, you know, impact anything and anyone at any time. So then we're
Yes.
also missing like all of parents who can have a lot of OCD themes latch on to parenting and being a parent and their children, but they're
Hmm.
not like pregnant or just recently had a baby, I
Right.
so we want to make sure that we normalize like through like this mom group or other resources that it's also not only in pregnancy and postpartum, moms, all moms and parents with OCD need that support too.
I love that. And you're right. I mean, it can happen. It can kind of evolve and change form and also kind of hit you at random parts. It doesn't, really matter where along the lines of a parent you are, or as a person, in general, right? So,
Absolutely.
that's so important. And yourself as a mother with, with two children, and you also have experience working with children, teens, adults across the spectrum of with OCD. Do you find that there's any correlation amongst like young kids, young people coming in with OCD? Do you find that there's a specific kind of age group that has OCD the most, or do you see that it's kind of like sprinkled across the board?
Well, research shows it tends to, I believe it's about a third of the time it develops in kind of those later elementary childhood ages, usually more for
Hmm.
boys.
Hmm.
Not sure why. The onset or when somebody starts to see symptoms can also be in like the mid to late teenage years, and some people see it in adulthood too. Um, so that kind of makes sense with what I've seen.
Hmm.
We were talking earlier about like people not being afraid to talk about it and coming in. I think it's great that we're seeing more kids. I mean, of course, it's sad that kids are struggling, but
Of
um,
course.
like when I meet with kids that have OCD, it's like, okay, good. You don't have to wait till you're, like 30 years old to know that this is a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I empathize very heavily with that, and I
Mhm.
I think I didn't, my parents and I, we didn't understand because I started presenting symptoms at 10.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't really know half of the things that we're talking about right now. I didn't know half of this, 5 years ago. So,
Right.
this is still a lot of information that's uh, new to me. But I think, when you talk about kids showing up and these kind of tendencies and intrusive thoughts and things that are kind of coming up for them at such a young age, how do you how do you tell a child, what OCD is, and especially with things like ERP and ICBT, how do you navigate that and getting them kind of follow through with something like that?
Yeah, it's similar but a little different.
Mm-hmm.
We still educate kids on OCD just like we do with adults.
Mm-hmm.
We always want to be real about things and especially normalize, when it comes to especially those more taboo themes.
Yes.
We use a little more like kind of books and
Mm-hmm.
metaphors, games, so there are some more kind of kid-friendly ways to educate and keep them interested. With ERP, it could be a little more like challenges.
Mm-hmm.
We're all kind of doing a bravery challenge together. And most importantly, getting the family or support people involved as much as possible because, they're the ones parenting this child and working them through the therapy and the homeworks, reducing accommodations. So a lot of work with the family too.
That's that's great to hear. And to know that that's not something that's unfamiliar, in terms of like educating families, together. And that's something that I loved about the conference too, is realizing that they had, so many subdivisions of like this is good for teens, this is good for caregivers or, family members. And,
Yeah.
this is like loved that so much because I was like, this isn't just for people who have OCD or clinicians. Like this is for everybody to kind of really get in and support each other and learn about this,
Yeah.
which is
So you're so excited that your
incredible.
mom was there.
Trust me,
So
I
sweet.
I really would not be here without her, and and she's a big part of my healing journey, and she's learning with most of us as well. She's somebody who heard the same questions a million and one times from me and kept giving me the same answers before she would realize that, hey, this isn't helpful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
she learning that as a parent too, as a parent and saying, yeah, I can't, like, I have cats. Okay. Like my cat is sleeping next to me. That's the closest thing I can relate from being a parent. I don't have kids of my own. I can't tell you that I know what that feels like, but to be empathetic in the way that I am and try to put myself in my mom's shoes or my dad's shoes and say, what would I do if my kid was so distraught and needed answers about the same thing? Like how would I hold back that reassurance in a loving way? And so it just gives me so much more empathy for parents who are learning that, right now.
Yeah. Especially with the reassurance questions, right? Like repeatedly getting asked the same question. Your default would be to answer it.
Right.
Like, okay, well, I'm gonna be here for my kid. I'm gonna answer it. But
Yeah.
it can be so they can really reinforce that OCD cycle and like people just don't know, right? Like I imagine if you
Yeah.
guys found that out and it's like, okay, even just having a code word or being or just plain not answering or being like,
Hmm.
that's reassurance, not answering it again, it
Yes.
it helps so much. And everybody knows what's going
Yeah.
on, right?
Exactly. So I love that. I want to pivot this a little bit more. Are you okay with talking about your experience with public speaking and kind of your journey with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Comfortable talking about essentially anything. We didn't even really get into, what where I've experienced OCD. I'm glad to come back to
Yeah,
that too. But
I would love to hear
that
that.
wasn't intentional, just a lot of talking. Yeah. So the public speaking phobia, I would say kind of similar to where I mentioned a lot of OCD comes up for people. Like when I was a kid, people definitely and maybe still see me as a very outgoing social person. I was into like theater and music and it was pretty sudden and were maybe like late elementary, like early adolescence, teen years. It was like, and this is pretty common. You can think in a more complicated way. Anxiety
Hmm.
often develops at this age, but essentially, I just kind of realized that it's really uncomfortable to be up in front of a lot of people, and my
Yeah.
brain did not like that, and was like, we need to avoid this. My
Yes.
brain also decided that it wanted to avoid having my face be really red in front of people or sweating in front
Hmm.
of people, which as anyone else knows that can relate, if you fixate on that too much, it just worsens and then the phobia gets worse. Um,
Yes. I can relate to
it
that
was
very much
usually,
as well.
yeah, especially as somebody with very light skin, it's going to get worse. But it was usually things like, giving presentations in school. It wasn't always only giving talks and things like that. It could be maybe kind of just speaking up in front of a group, being in bigger group settings. Um, when I was in grad school, this was all before COVID, so it was in person. We had
Hmm.
a capstone project at the end, kind of like where people do a thesis, but not as intense. But we were going to get up in front of everyone else in the program and talk about what we learned in internship and answer questions. And knowing that was coming up, I was thinking, you know what, like this is really important to me. I might be anxious, but I don't want it to be something that I am anticipating like this for like months because it's really before
Yeah.
and after it happens that's the worst part.
Yep.
So I got a new therapist at the time, and he really helped me work on rehearsing, and so that was more of where my ERP experience was personally at the time. And it went very well. I incorporated some meaning into the presentation. Like I wore clothes that were I don't want to get too into like the privacy of it because it had to do with work
Sure.
and internship, but I wore some clothes that were meaningful to what I was
Hmm.
speaking about and tried to have fun with it. And I was very anxious, but it went very well. And I still practice now if, doing it right now.
I love that. Everybody talks about, especially in performing, because I heard it my whole life as a performer. Practice meets, opportunity, or preparation meets, opportunity is it's in between with the practice. And however you practice, that's what's going to be what comes out on the other side. So, practice perfect practicing, not practicing your mistakes, because that's what I was taught. Practice is what makes perfectionism. Like it's not like a place where you want to make mistakes. It's a place where you just got to keep doing this perfectionism thing over and over again, so that it's like second nature when you get to the stage. And when you were practicing and you're practicing these speeches and you're doing these exposures, for yourself, was there any part of you that kind of like took over, when you got to the stage or the podium, where it's like second nature, where you're not even thinking about it? Or was it still throughout the process something that was very anxiety provoking from like start to finish for you?
At that time, I mean, I would say once I think it was like you were speaking to, like, especially with like an appropriate amount of
Hmm.
rehearsal and like being in the space and honestly kind of expecting to be anxious because it's
Hmm.
okay. Um, yeah, once I got in there, I was like it got going, and again, I was still nervous, but I was focused on what I had to do, and like you kind of get in performance mode, right? You're able to focus despite being anxious. I answered the questions that people were asking me,
Hmm.
um and yeah, I think that gets a little smoother the more that you practice too, right?
Yeah. And also the fact that you can feel multiple things at the same time, as
Mhm.
somebody who can feel that anxiety, but also feel prepared, or feeling that anxiety and also feeling in the zone at the same time. We're not just beings that feel one thing and then move on to the next. Sometimes it's a multitude of things, especially with
Yeah.
anxiety. So, I empathize greatly with that, because public speaking is not easy. It's not an easy thing to do, and whether you're good at it or not, there's always the unexpected thing. That there's always an unexpected part of it where people ask questions, and people are behaving in a way that you can't really control. So I can see why that's a big phobia as well. But I'm so happy to see, like, even you being here on the podcast. Um, is a testament to that, to that ERP work, to that
Yeah.
preparation, to showing up, right? And you being at the IOCDF and running, support groups and meeting with people. I mean, I think that that itself is a testament to the work that you're doing and the work that you've done. And that should be, I feel like, an inspiring thing for people to see.
Trust me, if I can do it, you can too, people. I would
Yeah.
say it helps. Thank you for saying that, first of all. It helps if you care about what you're doing. If anyone's maybe stuck in more of like a school setting and they have to give talks there, and it's like, yeah, doing things like this is a lot more fun because it has to do with things
Hmm.
that I love and care about. Yeah, running a
Yeah.
support group at the conference, and I feel like I still want to work up to like I'd probably still be pretty anxious doing like much bigger talks, so it's not gone, but like you
Hmm.
said, getting to do things that align with my values, then it's like it's fine if I'm anxious about it,
Yeah.
or during.
When you talk, yeah, and that's usually when it's, I like it when people talk about it, anticipatory anxiety, because it sometimes feels almost worse beforehand and rather than when you're actually doing it.
And
Um,
after.
yeah, and after, especially with the OCD voice being so critical too, and being such a hater from the stands, you know what I mean? So that's something that
Yeah, it is like
it is a hater. A lot of people may not realize that, but I think when you talk about values too, value-based ERP, for someone who's never heard of ERP, I've talked about it a few times on the podcast, and it's something that I'm just now getting started in
Mhm.
with a professional because I never got ERP growing up, and I tried it myself, and it was basically just torture, especially without working with a professional. So when you talk about values based ERP, what in its simplest terms, like what is that?
Yeah, the short version is it's going about exposures, behaviors you want to do, challenges for yourself while resisting compulsions that have to do with things that are important to you, right? And exposure being really anything imagined or real in vivo that could likely trigger intrusive
Hmm.
thoughts, images, or urges to do compulsions. When we're crafting exposures for ourselves, like we can do things that make ourselves anxious. Like I always say, that part's really easy. For like what can we
Sure.
do to trigger your OCD? But like how can we do it in a meaningful way where like it's actually going to function in your life,
Hmm.
right? So for
Yeah.
example, if let's say somebody, I don't know, let's go with like the parenting, right? If maybe somebody is afraid of a contamination type of theme, but they want to take their kids out more to do things. Maybe they avoid that, or they would go out to the park with their kids, but overuse things like hand sanitizer or checking, and to be like, okay, like go to your favorite park, go do something that
Hmm.
you want to do with your kids while using of course mindfulness skills to be
Yes.
aware of and be resisting your compulsions or delaying them during that time.
Hmm.
So many examples, but um, we aren't only doing exposures just to get anxious. We're doing them to function in our lives and do things that are important to us.
I love that you use the parenting example because I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, especially, contamination OCD, I think would be one of the more talked about themes of OCD. And I know personally, like it's something that's followed me throughout my life. It's really tough to deal with. Something as simple as if I think somebody had shared this and I really loved it. Somebody said, what would the behavior be if you didn't have OCD? If you didn't have that debilitating fear or you didn't have that intrusive thought, like what would you be doing? Would you be going to the park with your kids? Would you be going to that specific
Right.
coffee shop to meet up with a friend? um and so I that's something that really stuck with me, and I think you explained values-based like really well. And I think a lot of people will resonate with that, and that's why like you can explain things way better than I could. Like I feel like I'm really good at, conversation and also storytelling, but I feel like to have someone like you who understands the mechanics of how this works, and someone who's gone
Mhm.
through ERP and is helping others with theirs, like you guys should be the ones with podcasts. So I think that's something I'm very thankful for, for you to be able to come on here and tell your side of it too, because there's so many stories that I hear of people going to therapy, people looking for help and not being met with the right help from a clinician's point of view. So to see someone such as yourself dedicated to specializing in OCD specifically, and its many forms and its many types of people who deal with it. I mean, that's inspiring for me. And I think more people such as yourself should have that voice in the space to help other clinicians as well, because it is still, very misunderstood in the medical community.
Yeah. And thank you so much. And I've listened, of course, to your podcast, especially where you're explaining, some of your own lived experiences. And I think you explained it really well. But yeah, you're newer to ERP, so I understand. But it
Yeah.
could be like that one way you hear somebody explain it, or that one metaphor or something. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, and love I was thinking when you mentioned like OCD being a hater, having OCD is kind of like being up and giving a talk or a
Mhm.
comedy type of thing, and like there's hecklers the whole time. Just like you said. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think that's how it feels, as like it's very, it just is that voice that doesn't shut up, and the voice just says things that you want nothing to do with. And
Yeah.
that's the hard part about it, is that we, people talk about it being ego dystonic, and it's something that attacks, the things that you really love. And you can go down the list of it, but at the end of the day, it's saying things that you don't want to hear. It's saying things that are very, uncomfortable. And part of, dealing with that is learning how to be okay even while being uncomfortable. Part of being, not pushing the thought away, not, going to perform the compulsion, but learning how to sit with that discomfort, which is the hardest thing to do for somebody with
Yeah.
OCD and panic attacks, right? But when I met you at the conference, you were talking about how you just finished a um, a program where I forgot what it was called, Beats for like something. It
Oh,
had to do with
it's
music.
OCD. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm a musician and my profession is music producer. So like I produce music for a
Hmm.
living, and um, that's a very big passion of mine. Do you find that there's any correlation between music and OCD, like therapy wise? Is there any correlation between healing with OCD using music?
Mm. Well, I'll answer that, but I'll explain like what you're referencing to. But me and a
Yeah.
couple of my colleague friends, shout out my friend Desiree, because she actually came up with this whole idea, and then she got sick and couldn't make it to the
Oh
conference.
no.
I know, it's so sad. It's really, really
Uh,
sad. But the talk, it was an activity for high schoolers that were there on essentially creating your own ERP playlist. So
mhm.
learning about how you can use music for exposure therapy. Um, you know, are there like songs or lyrics that have to do with your particular theme, or even that you might avoid? Songs can be associated so much already with memories, even if the lyrics don't necessarily have to do with an OCD theme. And then making a list that you can listen to for exposures. Um, I don't know necessarily of like studies about correlation with music and OCD, but using music can be another values based exposure for people, right? So, like, first of all,
Wow.
music is everywhere. Like, we can't avoid it anyway. So, even if you don't listen to it a ton, you're probably going to be in a store or hear it, or you know
Hmm.
how it is if there's a song you're trying to get away from, like you're probably going to hear it.
Yeah.
But uh, you know, a lot of people like it. And we know OCD tends to attack the things that you value. So it might tell you that you shouldn't listen to certain music. You might have an intrusive thought come up if you listen to it.
Hmm.
Don't listen to it in the gym or in a particular area. Um, so to answer your question, it can be one of the many ways that we can just use things in our lives for exposures.
I love that. To be honest with you, I never um like made the correlation. It was never a thought at with like dealing with OCD, or like, getting prepared for an exposure on some level. The thought never entered my brain, to kind of make a playlist, like an exposure playlist, to prepare you, or to even to like be part of the exposure itself. Um, like I think that's brilliant. I think that's brilliant.
Or it could be yeah, people listening can think about what songs would be on your exposure playlist. And if you're unsure, I mean, there's a song for everything. There are
Yeah.
even songs about contamination and dirt. It could be about you know, there's a million songs about relationships. So you
Wow.
can have at it with
Yeah.
that, right? If it's like relationship OCD, and you would listen to the
Hmm.
music or listen to it in a variety of settings. So yeah, shout out to my friend Desiree. She came up with the whole idea and then she missed the conference, but
I heard that quite a few people got sick post the conference with COVID, and
yeah, it's too bad.
d- I thought it was just like one of those things, because here I am thinking, because I have contamination OCD and I've had COVID a couple times, which was not fun. But I was kind of expecting, I was like, if I'm going to be around quite a lot of people for the first time in a long time, I think there's a good chance that I'll probably get a cold or COVID or something. And when I got home, I was seeing on my social, on social media, that so many people that I'd seen there were sick with COVID. And I was like, what are the chances that like we go to, like, that's an exposure in itself for those of us with contamination. Like we go to the OCD conference and get,
Yeah,
like get COVID. But I think so I guess where I was going with that was, it sounds like you didn't get COVID. So uh
I did not somehow. Did you?
yeah. No, I didn't. No. I that's why I felt really bad. I almost had like like that what do you call that? Like that survivor's guilt feeling, where it's like, oh man, like everybody else got COVID and I like skipped out on it. But I was obviously thankful. But and everybody seems to be doing better now that I saw. So the biggest thing that I took away from something like that, and this kind of goes into like your story as a therapist and someone who has it, themselves, is the community aspect of OCD, and really how supportive, people in this community, including yourself, are towards other people, that I've never really experienced outside before. I have never really experienced that outside of my own support system. And um, I'm wondering if it's maybe because this is one of those disorders that is just really hard to deal with, and we kind of all on some level understand each other to some degree, where it's like, what, like, you understand how my brain works and I got your back, and vice versa. Whereas I feel like maybe, you know depression can be a very is a comorbid condition, obviously, that many people have, including myself. But I feel like depression is so talked about amongst so many people across the world, which is good. But OCD is still, you know, still growing in a sense, in terms of like how we talk about it and how we communicate about it, and spread awareness. I'm wondering if that's one of the reasons why this community is so close and tight knit, or at least from your experience as a therapist who's part of the IOCDF, and someone who is involved heavily in the OCD community. Do you see the same thing that I'm seeing in terms of like the close knit community of OCD itself?
Absolutely, 100%. And yeah, I want to say if anyone doesn't feel that way, I feel for you. Please reach out, go to
Yeah.
IOCDF, go to events. Because it's pretty quick being in a place like the conference, local OCD walks,
Hmm.
where it's just, oh, okay, welcome
Hmm.
to the club. None of us really like wanted to be here at first, but we love you and come on in. And
Hmm.
I was more involved first as a therapist, and I think why I really continued with this specialty was really quite honestly because I just fell in love with the community. And then as I got a little bit more open about, or have continued to get more open about my own stuff, it was kind of like a new level of that of, and of course wondering, oh yeah, how's it going to be if I talk about it more? I'm just not accustomed to that. And again, same thing, very much just like, oh great, like yeah, you're in the
I'm
club.
accepted. Yeah.
Yeah, immediate
And with your,
acceptance.
yeah, like your experience talking about your story and, like your phobia of public speaking and you seeing a lot of tendencies in other people that you can trace back to, young Erin. Do you feel that that sharing that you have taken a part of, do you feel like that's been therapeutic for you? And I know we talk about how talk therapy is different than ERP, but do you feel that, you've given your like younger self a little bit of a hug, now that you are more open to talking about it and are, involved in the community in such a way?
I think so. Like not as
Mm.
intentionally as a part of therapy, but I've definitely looked back to like I don't know, like having trouble falling asleep at night because I am think a plane is going to crash down if I don't do something the right way. Or there's been periods of time based on where I lived where I would get up and check the back door a lot because I was scared that somebody was going to break into the house. I can remember doing those things and nobody knowing about it, and think about myself and like have that compassionate view, of like you didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
So yes, I think so.
That's a question that I always like to kind of peek behind the curtain in terms of like looking back at myself, and how he acted, and how he thought, and just kind of like, hey, you're good, dude. Like it's okay. So I always like to like
Right.
see that in other people too, because it
Yeah.
is, that like almost guilt or like mourning of that time that you suffered, or lost time. Like it's a real thing that I feel like people don't talk about, is that mourning of the time that you lost to anxiety or lost to the intrusive thoughts. Like it's a real thing.
Absolutely. And even as like a young adult, again, had some wonderful therapists. I would use it more before the end of the public speaking focus to discuss just like big adjustments and changes in my life. And but I'm realizing now I spent so much time excessively talking
Hmm.
about like family dynamics and things that I was very clearly obsessed about and ruminating over in therapy. And it is hard to look back and think, oh my gosh, if I knew way
Hmm.
sooner, I probably would have worked on not doing that or approaching it in a different way. But um, definitely get that in terms of it just being sneaky like that and not realizing until later how much time you've spent
Yeah.
on things. And
Yeah.
now it can
But
start, and it still happens, but I can go, oh, we're not going to do that.
yeah.
Don't even.
Yeah. And for people who may feel like they don't have that control yet, right? Where they can decide, okay, I'm going to hold off on the compulsion, or I'm going to redirect where I put my attention. Um, what would you say to them, in terms of like, hey, I know it's hard right now, but like recovery is possible. How would you say that to them?
Well, first I would say it like that, but also it is possible, and it's not that flawless. It's definitely not as flawless as I'm making it sound. It takes a lot of practice. Like you said, it's so hard to do ERP on your own. Please see a
Yeah.
therapist or find one of the free support groups at least while you're waiting. And get some
Mhm.
resources or support. Um, but yes, it's completely possible, and the recovery, just like OCD itself, looks so different for everybody. Um,
Mhm.
as hard as it is to think about, don't expect that you'll just be void of these things. You know, you'll still have intrusions and urges to do compulsions, but you can work on being more aware of them, managing them, working with them, and then of course again being able to do more things that are important to you.
I love that. I feel like I could talk to you for hours about this kind of these. I mean,
We definitely could.
I love talking about this because it's necessary, but also I learn things every time I hop on here with someone new, and someone such as yourself who has experience and also is doing so much work in the community. I mean, I appreciate all of that and everything that you're doing.
Thanks. I feel like
It
each
is
question could have been its own episode.
Yeah. I
Great.
know. I feel like that's something I need to kind of dive deeper into as the show, goes along. Maybe specifically having episodes where we just answer one or two questions in depth and really give people, the Wikipedia version of each answer. But Erin, this has been incredible. I do want to ask you, is there anything that you want to leave here on the podcast? Anything at all to anybody, to your past self, to people listening? Any advice? Anything?
Thank you for listening. I want people to know that, OCD can show up in so many different ways for people. This is only my story and my perspective. So whether it just comes up for you sometimes, or you're more high functioning, or it's just very, very severe, this community sees you and understands you. Um, I hope that somebody can relate to some of what I'm saying and find it helpful. And please reach out or go through IOCDF if you need to look for some more resources, because they're out there.
And where can they find you?
Me, the Instagram that I need to work on posting more on is Erin Talks OCD. Very fitting since I'm doing that now. My I can also give you my email to post too.
Yes, I can put that in the show notes for anybody who wants to reach out and connect with you in terms of getting help or maybe resources in general. I think you're an incredible person to talk to, especially in this community,
Thank you.
and I really just appreciate you coming on here and shedding some wisdom and your experience and story.
Thank you so much. It's been really fun and great talking to you. I appreciate you having me.